Picture this. It's a freezing night somewhere in prehistoric Africa over 1 million years ago. The wind cuts across an open plain like a blade. There is no fire yet, no blanket, no hut with a roof, and most shocking of all, no clothes. Not a single stitch of fabric or fur wrapped around a single human body. Now picture yourself naked in that same spot right now. How long do you think you'd survive? An hour? A night? Most of us wouldn't make it until sunrise. We'd be shivering within minutes, desperately searching for anything, a rock, a hollow log, another warm body, just to make it through until dawn. And yet, somehow, our ancestors did survive. Not for one lucky night, but for hundreds of thousands of years. Long before anyone stitched together the first piece of clothing, early humans were already walking across open savannas under a brutal sun, surviving freezing nights without shelter, hunting animals many times their size, and raising children, all while completely bare-skinned, exposed to a world that seemed almost designed to kill them. So how did they do it? How does a soft, hairless, clawless, relatively slow creature survive in a world full of teeth, cold, and constant danger, without a single piece of protective clothing to rely on? The answer is one of the most incredible survival stories in the history of our species. It's a story of biology, intelligence, cooperation, and sheer stubbornness. And by the end of it, you'll understand something strange about your own body that you are using right now without even realizing it. Let's go back, way back, to a time before clothes even existed as an idea. And let's follow that story, piece by piece, all the way to the exact moment everything finally changed. To understand this story, we first have to understand something surprising. Our earliest ancestors were not naked the way we imagine today. Millions of years ago, they were covered in thick body hair, just like almost every other mammal on the planet. The same way chimpanzees, gorillas, and every other primate alive today still are. If you traveled back far enough, our ancestors would have looked far more like the great apes you'd see in a zoo than like modern humans standing in front of a mirror. But somewhere along the evolutionary road, something strange happened. Our ancestors began losing that fur. Not overnight and not all at once. Over hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of years, generation after generation, human bodies slowly became smoother, more exposed, more vulnerable to wind, sun, cold, and every predator watching from the tall grass. Why would evolution do something so seemingly reckless? Every other large mammal on the African plains kept its protective coat. Lions have fur, elephants have thick, tough hide. Antelope and buffalo are covered head to hoof. Why would the one creature already struggling to compete with sharper claws, faster legs, and bigger teeth decide to strip away one of its only natural defenses against the elements? On the surface, it looks like a losing move, a species voluntarily giving up armor in the middle of a war it was already losing. But nature rarely does anything without a reason, even when that reason takes scientists centuries to fully uncover. It wasn't a mistake. It was a trade-off. One of the most consequential trade-offs in the entire history of evolution, one that would eventually reshape how humans hunted, how they slept, how their skin looked, and ultimately, how they came to dominate nearly every environment on Earth. And the reason behind it connects directly to how early humans found food, which is exactly where our story picks up next. Here's the theory that changed everything scientists thought they knew. Early humans didn't lose their fur by accident, and they didn't lose it for comfort or appearance. They lost it because they became hunters. And not just any hunters. Endurance hunters, built for a completely different kind of chase than any predator before them, unlike lions or cheetahs, which rely on short, explosive bursts of speed before collapsing from exhaustion within seconds. Early humans developed something almost no other large mammal on the planet had ever developed: the ability to run, walk, and track for hours, even in blistering heat, without collapsing. This strategy is known today as permit hunting. Instead of trying to outsprint prey, which no human could ever do against a healthy antelope, ancient humans would simply chase an animal for hours under the scorching African sun, patiently tracking its footprints, broken grass, and scattered droppings until the animal literally overheated and collapsed from exhaustion, unable to take another step. But there was a serious problem standing directly in the way of this strategy. Thick fur traps, heat close to the body. the same way a heavy winter coat would if you tried sprinting a marathon while wearing it. An animal covered in fur, forced to run for hours under an unforgiving sun, would overheat and collapse long before its prey ever did. In other words, fur would have made humans terrible at the very hunting strategy their survival increasingly depended on. So natural selection made a brutal but brilliant trade. It stripped away the fur, generation after generation, and in exchange, gave humans something almost no other mammal on Earth possesses in the same way: millions of sweat glands covering nearly the entire body, as many as 2 to 4 million in a single person, allowing heat to escape constantly through evaporation. Losing fur wasn't a random accident or a strange fluke of nature. It was a cooling system upgrade, engineered over an almost unimaginable stretch of time, that quietly turned humans into some of the most relentless endurance hunters the natural world had ever produced. And this new biological advantage completely changed the way every single hunt unfolded from that point forward. Let's slow down and really picture what a persistence hunt actually looked like on the ground, because it directly proves why losing fur was a risk worth taking. A small group of hunters spots an antelope grazing quietly in the early morning light. They don't throw a single spear. They don't even run. They simply begin walking toward it, steady, calm, and unhurried, almost as if they're in no rush at all. The antelope, sensing danger, bolts instantly, sprinting away at incredible speed, easily outrunning the humans within seconds and disappearing over a distant ridge. But the hunters don't stop, and they don't panic. They simply keep walking in the same direction, following tracks pressed into the dirt, broken twigs, and disturbed grass, reading the land like a map only they can see. The antelope, having sprinted at full speed, now desperately needs to rest and cool down. But its thick fur traps heat against its body, and under the rising midday sun, its internal temperature climbs to a dangerous level. It stops in whatever patch of shade it can find, sides heaving, panting heavily, trying to recover. But before it can fully cool down, the humans arrive again, calm and steady as ever, forcing it to bolt and run once more. This cycle repeats itself again and again. Sprint, hide, overheat, forced to run again. Sometimes stretching across 10 or 15 miles of open, sun-scorched terrain, hour after hour, long after most predators have already given up and retreated into the shade. Eventually, the antelope's body simply cannot cool down fast enough between each desperate sprint. Heat exhaustion sets in fully. Its legs begin to shake, then give out entirely. And the same slow, patient, sweating hunters who could never have caught it in a straight line race finally walk up, calm and unhurried, and end the hunt. This wasn't about brute strength. It wasn't about speed. It was biology and patience working together in perfect partnership. What makes this even more remarkable is that persistence hunting required more than just a cooling body. It required a thinking mind. Hunters had to track subtle signs most people today would walk right past without noticing. A slightly disturbed patch of dirt, a single broken blade of grass, the faint scent carried on shifting wind. They had to predict which direction a frightened, overheating animal was likely to run, sometimes cutting across open ground to intercept it rather than simply following in a straight line. This wasn't mindless chasing. It was an early, highly sophisticated form of problem solving, built entirely around patience, observation, and teamwork between hunters who had to trust each other completely across miles of dangerous open terrain. And this exact same bare, sweating body that made humans unstoppable hunters by day, capable of outlasting animals far stronger and faster than themselves, was about to become their single biggest weakness the moment the sun finally went down. Being naked helped humans survive the blazing heat of the day, turning a slow, clawless creature into one of the most unstoppable endurance hunters on the entire savanna. But that same advantage came with a brutal price the moment darkness fell. Temperatures on the African savanna can drop dramatically after sunset, sometimes by more than 30 degrees Fahrenheit within just a few hours, turning a blistering afternoon into a genuinely cold night. A body brilliantly engineered for cooling itself down in extreme heat suddenly faced the exact opposite problem after dark, losing precious body warmth far too quickly, with no fur left anywhere to trap it against the skin. This wasn't a minor inconvenience that early humans could simply shrug off. Cold nights, especially for infants, the elderly, and anyone already weakened by illness or hunger, could be genuinely deadly. A body so brilliantly adapted for daytime survival became dangerously exposed the instant the sun dropped below the horizon, and there was no biological shortcut waiting to solve this new problem the way sweat glands had solved the last one. So early humans had to develop entirely different strategies to survive after sunset. Strategies that had absolutely nothing to do with clothing. Because clothing, as we understand it today, simply didn't exist yet, not even in a primitive form. Two things saved them, and both would go on to shape the rest of human history, far beyond simply surviving the cold. The very first defense wasn't technology at all, it was closeness. Early humans slept in tight, deliberate groups, bodies pressed directly together for shared warmth. Children tucked safely into the very center of the group where it stayed warmest, adults forming a protective outer ring against both the biting cold and any predator that might be lurking just beyond the firelight. Or, in these earliest days, beyond the darkness itself. This nightly ritual didn't just provide physical warmth. It quietly built something far more important: trust, cooperation, and the earliest foundations of human community. Long before language, permanent shelter, or reliable fire had fully developed as dependable tools for survival. Then came fire. Nobody knows the exact moment humans first learned to control it, but evidence suggests it happened somewhere between 1 million and 400,000 years ago, long before clothing existed in any recognizable form. And importantly, long after humans had already been surviving cold nights through huddling alone for a very long stretch of time. Once humans finally mastered fire, everything changed, almost overnight in evolutionary terms. Fire meant warmth on even the coldest nights, transforming freezing darkness into something not just survivable, but almost comfortable. Fire meant protection, since nearly every dangerous predator on the savannah instinctively feared its light and heat, giving humans something they had rarely experienced before: genuine safety after dark. Fire meant cooked food, which made meat dramatically safer to eat and far easier to digest, unlocking significantly more energy and nutrients from every single meal than raw food ever could provide. And fire meant humans could finally stay awake safely after sunset, gathering close around the flames to rest, to talk, and eventually to begin passing down stories that would form the earliest foundations of shared culture. Before clothing ever existed in any form, fire was already doing the exact job that fabric and animal hides would later do. It created a small, artificial bubble of warmth and safety in the middle of an otherwise hostile, unpredictable world. A family sitting around a fire late at night, skin completely bare, faces glowing warm orange in the flickering light, watching sparks drift upward into a sky scattered with stars, was one of the very first forms of shelter humans ever truly built for themselves. Not constructed from walls or woven fabric, but shaped entirely out of flame, heat, and the simple act of staying close together. And with warmth and nighttime safety now finally under some measure of control, the next major problem early humans had to solve wasn't the cold anymore. It was the sun itself, and everything that came with living beneath it day after day. Fire and huddling had solved the cold, but another enemy still remained, one that never fully went away even after the flames were mastered: the sun itself, along with swarms of biting insects and the constant grinding wear of daily exposure to the elements. Evidence suggests early humans smeared mud, ash, and crushed plant matter directly onto their bare skin as a form of protection. A layer of mud could shield exposed skin from harsh, direct sunlight and help cool the body during periods of extreme heat, functioning almost like a crude, primitive form of sunscreen. Ash rubbed carefully onto the skin may have helped repel biting insects, a serious and often deadly problem in humid regions where insect-borne illnesses could spread easily through a small, closely huddled group. Some anthropologists believe these early markings may have also served a second purpose beyond pure protection, an early form of self-expression or identity. Long before woven clothing or jewelry existed, different patterns of mud or ash applied to the skin may have marked someone as belonging to a particular family or group, making the human body itself the very first canvas, and arguably the very first uniform. But underneath these surface-level solutions, a much deeper, far more permanent adaptation was quietly developing at exactly the same time, written directly into the skin itself rather than applied on top of it. As humans lost their protective fur, bare skin became newly and directly exposed to intense sunlight for the very first time in the species' evolutionary history. In regions with especially strong, consistent sun exposure, populations gradually developed significantly higher levels of melanin, the natural pigment responsible for protecting skin against damaging ultraviolet radiation, resulting in darker skin tones that functioned as a permanent, built-in form of sun protection, requiring no mud, no ash, and no daily reapplication. Later, as certain human populations migrated into regions with far less available sunlight, the opposite evolutionary pressure took hold instead. Lighter skin gradually developed, allowing the body to absorb more of the limited sunlight available in order to produce sufficient vitamin D, a nutrient essential for healthy bones and a properly functioning immune system. In other words, evolution had already quietly invented its own version of natural clothing, not woven fabric, but pigmentation itself, long before a single thread was ever spun or a single hide was ever worn on purpose. And remarkably, it's still written directly into the skin of every single person alive today. Beyond fire and skin protection, ancient humans also relied heavily on the landscape itself for survival. Caves, natural rock overhangs, and dense thickets of vegetation became reliable natural shelters against wind, rain, and the harshest edges of the cold, all without a single piece of woven material ever being involved. A shallow cave positioned carefully facing away from the prevailing wind, or a simple shallow pit dug into the earth and lined with dry grass or leaves could trap and hold warmth far more effectively than sleeping out in the open. Clear proof that early humans weren't merely passive victims of a harsh environment, but were actively engineering their surroundings using careful observation and intelligence. Alongside these shelters came the earliest tools, developed not to cover the body, but to make bare-skinned survival slightly more manageable. Sharpened stone flakes were used to scrape animal hides clean after a successful hunt, not yet with the intention of wearing them, but instead to use the treated skin for carrying water, storing food, or wrapping meat for transport back to camp. Simple wooden digging sticks helped uncover edible roots and tubers hidden underground, providing a crucial backup food source whenever hunting failed to produce results. These early tools solved small, individual pieces of an enormous survival puzzle, one at a time, generation after generation. And eventually, that same accumulated skill and knowledge was turned toward an entirely new and unexpected purpose. As humans began migrating out of warm, familiar Africa and into the far colder regions of Europe and Asia, the surrounding environment became dramatically more hostile than fire, shelter, and biological adaptation alone could fully handle. The nightly drop in temperature was no longer a manageable inconvenience. It was a direct and constant threat, especially in regions where snow covered the ground for months at a time. So early humans began experimenting, likely out of sheer desperation, with wrapping loose animal hides directly around their bodies for extra insulation and warmth, long before anyone had developed the concept of sewing, stitching, or shaping fabric in any deliberate way. At first, this almost certainly wasn't clothing in the way we understand the word today. It was likely nothing more than a single hide, still rough and unshaped, draped loosely over the shoulders shortly after a successful hunt, held roughly in place by nothing more than a simple knot of sinew or careful, practiced positioning. It's a small, almost accidental seeming step, but it represents the exact turning point between everything this story has covered so far. Well over 1 million years of surviving completely bare-skinned through sweat, cooperation, fire, and skin pigmentation, and the true beginning of clothing itself as a deliberate human invention. Over thousands of further years, this simple draped hide slowly evolved further. Bone needles, some of the oldest ever discovered dating back tens of thousands of years, show clear signs of use for piercing hide and threading sinew through it, the very first evidence of actual sewing, rather than simple wrapping or draping. What began as a single loose skin thrown over the shoulders after a hunt gradually became something shaped more deliberately to the body, fitted more snugly against the cold, and eventually passed down, improved, and refined by each new generation that inherited the knowledge. So the next time you put on a jacket without even thinking twice about it, remember this. For the vast majority of human evolutionary history, our ancestors survived without any clothing whatsoever. Not because they didn't feel the cold, and not because they didn't feel vulnerable standing exposed under an open sky, but because they were remarkably, almost unbelievably adaptable, using sweat, sunlight, fire, shelter, and each other to survive in a world that, by every reasonable expectation, should have destroyed a soft, bare-skinned creature within days of stepping out into it. Every single sweat gland on your body right now is a leftover tool from an ancient hunting strategy that once allowed exhausted, unarmed humans to outlast lions, antelope, and nearly every other animal under the punishing midday sun. Every difference in human skin tone found across the globe today is a leftover adaptation to sunlight exposure that began long, long before a single thread was ever woven on any loom. Your body, in a very real and literal sense, is walking proof of one of the most incredible, underappreciated survival stories in the entire history of life on Earth. Clothing didn't save humanity. Humanity survived long enough through sheer adaptability, cooperation, and quiet ingenuity to eventually invent clothing, and everything else that followed after it, from permanent settlements to written language to the screen you're watching this on right now. If this story surprised you, hit like, subscribe, and let me know in the comments, did you already know that humans could outsweet almost every other animal on the planet? And if you want the next chapter of human history, I've got you covered. Just stick around.